Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Lord Voldemort, a name that still sends shivers down the spines of witches and wizards years after his defeat. But if you take a closer look, you'll see the Dark Lord wasn't such an invincible genius of evil. He was overconfident, excessively vengeful, and at times simply foolish. Today, I invite you to examine the choices he made, the choices that effectively robbed him of victory. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Assuming no one knew Hogwarts' secrets. Voldemort always believed he alone knew all of Hogwarts' secrets. He was so sure of this that he hid one of his horcruxes in the room of requirement. But in reality, hundreds of students knew about that room, including Harry and Draco. Even when Voldemort realized Harry was hunting horcruxes, he didn't bother moving the diadem somewhere safer. It's a classic example of arrogance bordering on stupidity. Number 2. Creating the horcruxes. In itself, creating horcruxes was a logical move for a wizard obsessed with immortality, but the way he hid them was a complete disaster. Instead of choosing unremarkable objects and hiding them in places unreachable even to wizards, like the bottom of the ocean or in space, Voldemort picked well-known magical relics. He then hid them in places Harry and his friends could actually reach. His vanity and love of symbolism became his undoing. Number 3. The misconception about the Elder Wand. When Harry broke his plan with the twin cores, Voldemort decided to find the most powerful wand, the Elder Wand. He managed to take it but misunderstood its true nature. He thought killing Snape would make him its master, not realizing its loyalty already belonged to Harry. In the end, he destroyed his last defense against the boy he was so desperate to kill. Number 4. Choosing to trust Snape. Voldemort was pathologically suspicious and trusted no one. Ironically, this quality didn't save him from Snape's betrayal. Snape approached him as a loyal Death Eater, but after Lily Potter's death, he became obsessed with protecting her son. Voldemort naively assumed Snape's love for Lily was just childish infatuation. He allowed Snape to stay close for years without suspecting he was leaking every plan to Dumbledore. His absurd confidence in his own cunning played a cruel joke on him. Number 5. Choosing to believe Narcissa. When Voldemort thought he had killed Harry in the Forbidden Forest, he ordered Narcissa Malfoy to check if he was dead, but he didn't consider that at that moment she wasn't thinking about loyalty to him, only about her son Draco's fate. She lied to Voldemort saying Harry was dead, and he believed her without checking. How did the Dark Lord, who trusted no one, believe her with no guarantees? He didn't even realize such a critical moment required personal verification. Another catastrophic mistake. Number 6. Underestimating house elf magic. Voldemort was cautious enough to surround his horcruxes with powerful protective spells, but he forgot one important detail about house elf magic. He forced Kreacher to drink the potion in the cave and left him to die, but didn't consider that house elves could apparate despite wizard protections. In the end, Kreacher escaped and helped the Order of the Phoenix. Voldemort ignored even the most obvious holes in his security. Number 7. Giving Lucius the diary. The Dark Lord created the diary as a tool for opening the Chamber of Secrets, but decided to entrust it to Lucius Malfoy. After Voldemort's first downfall, Lucius used the diary for his own political games instead of his master's plan. By the time Voldemort returned, the diary had been destroyed. He punished Malfoy, but what was the point? The real mistake was trusting such an important artifact to someone like Lucius in the first place. Number 8. Blind faith in absolute control. Voldemort believed control was the same as power. He wanted to rule every corner of the wizarding world. He took over the ministry, filling it with fear and lies. He set Death Eaters as puppets in every office. In the Deathly Hallows, the Muggle-born Registration Commission hunted innocent people. He thought by stamping out dissent, he would crush hope itself. But while he spread terror, people learned to hide, to fight quietly. Hermione wiped her parents' memories and sent them to Australia. She gave up everything to keep them safe from his reach. Hogwarts, Voldemort's control forced the creation of resistance. He installed the Carrows to teach cruelty and fear. But this only hardened the students. Neville Longbottom, once shy and stumbling, led the DA in secret. In the Deathly Hallows, Neville said, "We're his army, Dumbledore's army." Voldemort never realized that every punishment, every order barked in terror, only created stronger enemies. The more he tried to smother freedom, the more people found ways to keep it alive. Even the Order of the Phoenix thrived in the shadows. They met in safe houses, moved through secret passageways, and sent coded messages. Voldemort did not understand that absolute control was impossible. People would always slip through the cracks. They would whisper, plot, and dream of freedom. His iron grip cracked because he never saw the human spirit cannot be commanded like an obedient servant. The tighter he squeezed, the more certain his failure became. Number 9, attacking Hogwarts without proper preparation. Voldemort's attack on Hogwarts was a rush of anger and fear. He knew Harry was hunting his last horcrux. He felt power slipping through his fingers. Instead of waiting, gathering all his Death Eaters and cutting off every exit, he struck in haste. In the Deathly Hallows, he offered terms through the darkness. "Give me Harry Potter, and no one need die." But even this demand showed panic. He didn't want a siege. He wanted surrender now. He didn't plan for a real battle. Inside the castle, defenders were preparing. Professors McGonagall and Flitwick fortified the walls. Molly Weasley armed the students. Kingsley Shacklebolt and the Order of the Phoenix arrived to fight. Voldemort knew they were there. Yet he failed to adapt. He refused to believe a school could stand against him. He waited in the Forbidden Forest, letting his army batter itself against Hogwarts' ancient protections. He thought fear would win for him. It didn't. Chaos consumed his forces. Giants and acromantulas turned on his own soldiers. The Death Eaters scattered under spells and hexes. When Harry returned alive, Voldemort's last illusion of control crumbled. His so-called strategy had been nothing but blind rage. He had let himself be cornered at Hogwarts, outnumbered and outwitted. In the end, his fear of losing the horcrux forced his hand. And that panic, not Harry's wand, truly defeated him. Number 10. Failing to inspire true loyalty. Voldemort ruled through terror. He believed fear was loyalty. He never understood that true loyalty must be earned. His Death Eaters followed him because they were afraid, not because they believed in him. When things went wrong, they ran. The Malfoy family was the clearest proof. Lucius Malfoy once knelt eagerly at Voldemort's feet. But after their son was endangered, their loyalty cracked. In the Deathly Hallows, Narcissa only asked, "Is Draco alive?" She didn't care about Voldemort's victory anymore. She only wanted her family safe. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, who adored Voldemort with fanatical devotion, showed the limits of fear-based rule. Her loyalty was twisted, obsessive, but fragile in its own way. She fought for him, yes, but she also sowed terror among allies and enemies alike. Voldemort let her torment others, creating bitterness and resentment in his own ranks. He thought cruelty kept people in line. He didn't see it bred plots and betrayals. Fear ensured obedience, but never trust. In the final battle, Voldemort faced the truth he refused to see. As Harry walked to meet his death, the Death Eaters watched in horror, not pride. When Voldemort fell, they fled. No one died for him willingly. No one held the line. The ones who stayed were forced. In the Battle of Hogwarts, the Malfoys slipped away, arm in arm, leaving the Dark Lord to fight alone. Voldemort never grasped the simplest rule of power. Armies built on fear collapse when fear turns against their master. Number 11. Ignoring the power of love and sacrifice. Voldemort never believed in love. He called it weakness. When Lily Potter stood between him and her baby, he saw only foolish defiance. He didn't understand that her sacrifice wove ancient magic around Harry. In the Sorcerer's Stone, Dumbledore explains, "To have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever." Voldemort refused to learn why the killing curse rebounded. He dismissed the very thing that made him vulnerable. Years later, he missed the same truth in Narcissa Malfoy. In the Forbidden Forest, he trusted her to confirm Harry's death, but she was a mother first, servant second. She asked Harry, "Is Draco alive?" and lied to save her son. Voldemort never saw it coming. He never imagined anyone would betray him out of love. He believed threats and cruelty could bend every will, but love twisted his perfect plan in a single whispered lie. Even Snape's loyalty was built on love Voldemort scorned. Snape didn't serve him, he served the memory of Lily. Voldemort mocked that devotion. He told Snape, "You have been useful to me." But he never saw the truth in Snape's eyes. In The Prince's Tale, Harry sees Snape holding Lily's letter, mourning. Voldemort couldn't comprehend that such love would drive Snape to protect Harry. By rejecting love as weakness, Voldemort made himself blind to the strongest magic in the world. Number 12. Underestimating Harry's youth. Voldemort never took Harry seriously. To him, Harry was just a boy with a scar. He believed raw power was everything. He never imagined that a child could grow, learn, and fight back. In the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort taunted Harry, calling him the boy who survived by accident. That arrogance blinded him. He staged a dramatic duel in the graveyard, toying with Harry instead of killing him outright. He wanted an audience for Harry's death. He wanted to prove there was no contest. He forgot that giving someone time means giving them a chance. Each year, Voldemort failed to end Harry quickly. Harry grew stronger. He learned spells that saved his life. He trained with Dumbledore. He built alliances with Hermione and Ron that turned into an unbreakable bond. Voldemort's attacks forced Harry to become braver, sharper, and more determined. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore warned Harry, "It was your heart that saved you." Voldemort never grasped that the very threats he sent made Harry into the one person who could end him. By underestimating Harry's youth, Voldemort became his own worst teacher. He taught Harry fear, then taught him how to conquer it. He gave Harry reason to fight and the means to do it. When they finally faced each other in the Great Hall, Voldemort still mocked him, calling him the boy who lived come to die. Even then, he couldn't see it. He didn't understand that the boy had become a man ready to defeat him. Number 13. Ignoring warnings of betrayal. Voldemort believed he was the master of fear. He thought no one dared betray him, but he missed the warning signs flashing in front of him. Quirrell trembled at every command, sweating under the weight of Voldemort's possession. He was a weak vessel, cracking under pressure. In Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell admits, "I tried to kill you, tried and failed." Even when he failed repeatedly, Voldemort pressed on, refusing to see that Quirrell's fear made him sloppy, doomed to break the moment Harry resisted. He repeated this mistake with Peter Pettigrew. Wormtail was the archetype of a coward. Voldemort should have recognized that a man who betrayed his best friends would betray again. But Voldemort used him anyway, giving him tasks that required loyalty and cunning. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius Black snarls, "He was the spy." It was common knowledge that Pettigrew bent with the wind. Voldemort didn't care. He mistook fear for loyalty, never seeing the crack that would eventually split wide open. Even among his closest followers, Voldemort refused to listen to warnings. Bellatrix Lestrange despised Pettigrew, called him worthless. Snape offered cryptic truths that went ignored. Voldemort valued obedience over honesty, silence over warning. He chose servants who wouldn't challenge him, no matter how treacherous they were at heart. He built his kingdom on fear and lies, never understanding that true power demanded trust, even at the cost of hearing things he didn't want to hear. Number 14. Failing to learn from past mistakes. Voldemort never learned from his own failures. He fell once. Brought low by a simple act of love he refused to understand. When he returned, he made the same arrogant choices. He gathered the same type of frightened, self-serving followers who cared more about saving themselves than serving him. Lucius Malfoy is the perfect example. Once trusted with the diary Horcrux, Lucius used it recklessly to advance his own goals, and yet after Voldemort's return, he was welcomed back into the inner circle with little more than a punishment. As Dumbledore warns Harry in Half-Blood Prince, you are forgetting the next lesson, which is that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. Voldemort refused to believe anyone, even himself, could grow. He never accepted the truth that his own cruelty created traitors. Wormtail is another clear sign of this failure. Voldemort punished him for cowardice, but still relied on him to restore his body. He didn't see that Wormtail's loyalty was bought with fear, not given freely. When Wormtail hesitated in Malfoy Manor, Voldemort killed him with his own silver hand. There was no forgiveness, no understanding of why fear alone would fail to bind someone forever. As Sirius once said about Wormtail, he's not brave enough to be a traitor on his own. Voldemort ignored that nuance, content to repeat the same mistake over and over. His disregard for strategy was equally disastrous. Even after Dumbledore's death, he underestimated Hogwarts defenders. He assumed they would fall apart without their headmaster. But he didn't change tactics from his first rise to power. He threatened, tortured, and killed to impose control. He never paused to wonder if that very approach inspired resistance. In Deathly Hallows, McGonagall roars to the defenders, "No, you can't! You will not!" when told to surrender. Voldemort's plan hadn't evolved at all since his first fall, and neither had the people's courage to defy him. Number 15. Contempt for Muggles and Muggleborns. Lord Voldemort, born Tom Riddle, built his entire ideology around the supremacy of pure blood wizards. He treated Muggles and Muggle-born witches and wizards as inferior beings, fit only for subjugation or extermination. This scorn shaped every choice he made, and yet it revealed a staggering flaw. He never tried to understand them. He dismissed their culture, their inventions, their way of thinking as meaningless. In doing so, he closed his mind to the possibility that they might know or do anything that could threaten him. His ignorance of the Muggle world wasn't just arrogance, it was strategic blindness. It is telling that he never bothered to understand, for example, how Muggles might use technology, or even how Muggle-born wizards thought differently from those raised in magical families. This disconnect left him vulnerable to people who refused to play by the rules he thought were unbreakable. Throughout the series, Voldemort is shown to be brilliant, cunning, and terrifyingly persuasive. He manipulates followers with promises of power, exploits their fears, and instills absolute loyalty through terror. But his manipulation always depends on shared assumptions. That power is the ultimate goal, that blood purity matters, that fear and violence will ensure obedience. He simply cannot fathom motivations outside these parameters. When he speaks of Muggles, he says, "filthy Muggle blood." Half-Blood Prince, showing absolute disgust but zero curiosity. That scorn ensured he never considered how a Muggle-born might use their upbringing to outwit him. Hermione Granger, for instance, grew up in a non-magical household. She applied logical deduction, research skills, and creativity to problems that stumped even skilled wizards. Voldemort never planned for an opponent who would look for answers in a Muggle library, let alone one who would carry non-magical essentials like a beaded handbag with an undetectable extension charm, packed like a hiker preparing for anything. Voldemort's obsession with blood purity blinded him to the tactical value of adaptability. While he invested in ancient magic and the protection of Horcruxes, he never anticipated that someone would sneak into the Ministry of Magic wearing Polyjuice Potion or break into Gringotts with a stolen dragon. Harry, Hermione, and Ron used their knowledge of the magical world, but also an improvisational spirit that was distinctly Muggle-like. When they used decoy spells, mundane disguises, and subterfuge learned from Muggle crime fiction and war stories, They exposed Voldemort's brittle overconfidence. Even the taboo spell he set on his name, a clever magical trap, was undone when they realized it was too obvious. The trio simply stopped using it, a basic counter-surveillance move anyone from the Muggle world would grasp. The most devastating example of Voldemort's failure to understand Muggle-born cunning is the theft of the horcrux from Gringotts. Gringotts was considered unbreachable in wizarding circles. Wizards were so confident in its magical defenses they did not bother thinking about other approaches. But Hermione realized that goblin alliances could be exploited, that Polyjuice could buy them time, that a dragon trained to fear pain could be unleashed in chaos. Her strategy was desperate, improvisational, and entirely outside Voldemort's worldview. When he discovered the theft, he was described as screaming in fury, Deathly Hallows. His rage wasn't just over the stolen horcrux, but over the violation of a system he considered inviolable. This contempt for Muggle ingenuity also explains Voldemort's consistent failure to anticipate sabotage or betrayal from those he considered lesser. He never truly controlled Severus Snape, who was half-blood. He underestimated Snape's personal loyalties and underestimated the fact that someone might act from love. He never believed that Dobby, the house elf, a creature he considered subhuman, could dare to disobey and rescue Harry from Malfoy Manor. Nor did he foresee Creature's transformation into a loyal ally to Harry after receiving kindness. Voldemort's entire worldview was built on the assumption that only fear and blood status mattered. He never planned for love, friendship, or gratitude to motivate anyone to oppose him effectively. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort chose to rely on raw terror and intimidation. He threatened to kill every student, to slaughter anyone who did not turn Harry over. His message over the school loudspeakers was chilling. You have fought valiantly. Lord Voldemort knows how to value bravery, yet you have sustained heavy losses. Give me Harry Potter, and none shall be harmed. Deathly Hallows. But this approach revealed his ignorance of how people, particularly young, stubborn, defiant people, would react. He expected them to crack under fear. Instead, they became more united. Harry's friends fought with desperation and creativity that Voldemort had no answer for, defending their home with every trick they could muster, magical or mundane. Voldemort's greatest failure was failing to see that Muggle-borns and half-bloods could bring strengths the pure-blood elite lacked. Hermione's encyclopedic planning, Harry's instinct for moral leadership, and even Lily Potter's self-sacrificial love all came from perspectives Voldemort scorned. His disdain for Muggle-borns ensured he never studied them as serious threats. He never asked how they learned to think, what motivated them, or how they balanced magical knowledge with Muggle problem-solving. He never imagined that someone like Hermione would memorize Hogwarts, a history, and use that knowledge to disable protective spells, or that Harry would learn to anticipate betrayal precisely because he had grown up in a suspicious, hostile environment with the Dursleys. Voldemort's failure also extended to his Death Eaters. He filled his ranks with the entitled, the cruel, and the cowardly, those who shared his obsession with blood purity. But that homogeneity was a weakness. None of them challenged his ideas or pointed out flaws. When they planned attacks, they used brute force or psychological terror, rarely subtlety. The Order of the Phoenix, by contrast, welcomed Muggle-borns, half-bloods, werewolves, and even former enemies like Snape. Their diversity meant they thought in different ways, questioned assumptions, and adapted constantly. Voldemort simply couldn't comprehend an organization built on trust and shared purpose rather than fear and hierarchy. Number 16. Lack of a long-term plan. Lord Voldemort, born Tom Riddle, built his entire ideology around the supremacy of pure-blood wizards. He treated Muggles and Muggle-born witches and wizards as inferior beings, fit only for subjugation or extermination. This scorn shaped every choice he made, and yet it revealed a staggering flaw. He never tried to understand them. He dismissed their culture, their inventions, their way of thinking as meaningless. In doing so, he closed his mind to the possibility that they might know or do anything that could threaten him. His ignorance of the Muggle world wasn't just arrogance, it was strategic blindness. It is telling that he never bothered to understand, for example, how Muggles might use technology, or even how Muggle-born wizards thought differently from those raised in magical families. This disconnect left him vulnerable to people who refused to play by the rules he thought were unbreakable. Throughout the series, Voldemort is shown to be brilliant, cunning, and terrifyingly persuasive. He manipulates followers with promises of power, exploits their fears, and instills absolute loyalty through terror. But his manipulation always depends on shared assumptions, that power is the ultimate goal, that blood purity matters, that fear and violence will ensure obedience. He simply cannot fathom motivations outside these parameters. When he speaks of Muggles, he says, "filthy Muggle blood," or half-blood prince, showing absolute disgust but zero curiosity. That scorn ensured he never considered how a Muggle-born might use their upbringing to outwit him. Hermione Granger, for instance, grew up in a non-magical household. She applied logical deduction, research skills, and creativity to problems that stumped even skilled wizards. Voldemort never planned for an opponent who would look for answers in a Muggle library, let alone one who would carry non-magical essentials like a beaded handbag with an undetectable extension charm, packed like a hiker preparing for anything. Voldemort's obsession with blood purity blinded him to the tactical value of adaptability. While he invested in ancient magic and the protection of horcruxes, he never anticipated that someone would sneak into the Ministry of Magic wearing Polyjuice Potion or break into Gringotts with a stolen dragon. Harry, Hermione, and Ron used their knowledge of the magical world, but also an improvisational spirit that was distinctly Muggle-like. When they used decoy spells, mundane disguises, and subterfuge learned from Muggle crime fiction and war stories, they exposed Voldemort's brittle overconfidence. Even the taboo spell he set on his name, a clever magical trap, was undone when they realized it was too obvious. The trio simply stopped using it, a basic counter-surveillance move anyone from the Muggle world would grasp. The most devastating example of Voldemort's failure to understand Muggle-born cunning is the theft of the Horcrux from Gringotts. Gringotts was considered unbreachable in wizarding circles. Wizards were so confident in its magical defenses they did not bother thinking about other approaches, but Hermione realized that goblin alliances could be exploited, that Polyjuice could buy them time, that a dragon trained to fear pain could be unleashed in chaos. Her strategy was desperate, improvisational, and entirely outside Voldemort's worldview. When he discovered the theft, he was described as screaming in fury. Deathly Hallows. His rage wasn't just over the stolen Horcrux, but over the violation of a system he considered inviolable. This contempt for Muggle ingenuity also explains Voldemort's consistent failure to anticipate sabotage or betrayal from those he considered lesser. He never truly controlled Severus Snape, who was half-blood. He underestimated Snape's personal loyalties and underestimated the fact that someone might act from love. He never believed that Dobby the house elf, a creature he considered subhuman, could dare to disobey and rescue Harry from Malfoy Manor. Nor did he foresee Creature's transformation into a loyal ally to Harry after receiving kindness. Voldemort's entire worldview was built on the assumption that only fear and blood status mattered. He never planned for love, friendship, or gratitude to motivate anyone to oppose him. Effectively, in the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort chose to rely on raw terror and intimidation. He threatened to kill every student, to slaughter anyone who did not turn Harry over. His message over the school loudspeakers was chilling. "You have fought valiantly. Lord Voldemort knows how to value bravery, yet you have sustained heavy losses. Give me Harry Potter, and none shall be harmed." Deathly Hallows. But this approach revealed his ignorance of how people, particularly young, stubborn, defiant people, would react. He expected them to crack under fear. Instead, they became more united. Harry's friends fought with desperation and creativity that Voldemort had no answer for, defending their home with every trick they could muster, magical or mundane. Voldemort's greatest failure was failing to see that Muggle-borns and half-bloods could bring strengths the pure-blood elite lacked. Hermione's encyclopedic planning, Harry's instinct for moral leadership, and even Lily Potter's self-sacrificial love all came from perspectives Voldemort scorned. His disdain for Muggle-borns ensured he never studied them as serious threats. He never asked how they learned to think, what motivated them, or how they balanced magical knowledge with Muggle problem-solving. He never imagined that someone like Hermione would memorize Hogwarts, a history, and use that knowledge to disable protective spells, or that Harry would learn to anticipate betrayal precisely because he had grown up in a suspicious, hostile environment with the Dursleys. Voldemort's failure also extended to his Death Eaters. He filled his ranks with the entitled, the cruel, and the cowardly, those who shared his obsession with blood purity. But that homogeneity was a weakness. None of them challenged his ideas or pointed out flaws. When they planned attacks, they used brute force or psychological terror, rarely subtlety. The Order of the Phoenix, by contrast, welcomed Muggle-borns, half-bloods, werewolves, and even former enemies like Snape. Their diversity meant they thought in different ways, questioned assumptions, and adapted constantly. Voldemort simply couldn't comprehend an organization built on trust and shared purpose rather than fear and hierarchy. Number 17, obsession with Slytherin symbols and legacy. Tom Riddle's unrelenting obsession with Salazar Slytherin's legacy shaped every monstrous decision he ever made, blinding him to the most obvious flaw in his strategy. This was not simply a personal fascination, it was the entire architecture of his power. He took Slytherin's ideals of blood purity and twisted them into terror, claiming legitimacy through lineage while refusing to consider that anyone would dare unravel his secrets through that very same legacy. The Chamber of Secrets itself was testament to his mind, fixated on the idea that what was ancient and secret was unassailable. Yet it was precisely this arrogance, his slavish devotion to Slytherin's myth, that left him so vulnerable to anyone perceptive enough to see the pattern. Dumbledore understood. Harry understood. Voldemort did not. He believed that by binding pieces of his soul to relics of Hogwarts founders, he elevated them to unbreakable symbols of his immortality. The locket of Salazar Slytherin was not merely a vessel, it was proof of his supposed right to rule. He sought objects that would whisper his dominion over Hogwarts itself, but those objects turned out to be signposts pointing directly to his weakness. Dumbledore was quick to see this. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says, Lord Voldemort liked to collect trophies, and he preferred objects that had belonged to Hogwarts founders. This wasn't a stroke of genius on Voldemort's part. It was a fatal tell. His need to root himself in Slytherin's legacy made him predictable to anyone who understood how he thought. In his youth, Tom Riddle was already hypnotized by the Chamber of Secrets. He discovered it not because he was subtle or careful, but because he so desperately wanted to be Slytherin's true heir. When he unleashed the basilisk, killing Myrtle Warren, he revealed how easily he let Slytherin's ideals control him. Instead of forging a new path to power, he chained himself to the vision of an ancient bigot. Riddle didn't see the danger in his devotion. He assumed that because others feared the Chamber's legend, no one would ever dare unlock its secrets again. Yet 50 years later, Harry Potter, armed with nothing but loyalty and instinct, stood inside that same chamber, dismantling the myth of its invincibility. Every horcrux Voldemort made betrayed this obsession. The gaunt ring was the relic of his own ancestry, a family line he celebrated even as it rotted in obscurity. The Slytherin locket belonged to his mother's family. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff, the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. He didn't just want to hide his soul. He wanted to corrupt everything sacred about Hogwarts. But Dumbledore saw the pattern. In Half-Blood Prince, he explains that Voldemort would never settle for ordinary hiding places or objects. His grandiose choices made his trail easier to follow. Voldemort thought the ancient magic of the Founders would make him eternal. Instead, it made him transparent. Voldemort's failure lay in assuming that symbolism equaled power. He believed that by possessing Slytherin's locket or the Cup of Hufflepuff, he could rewrite history itself, casting himself as the rightful ruler of the wizarding world. But relics are only symbols. Power lies in adaptability, strategy, and understanding one's enemies. Voldemort scorned these things. He underestimated love, loyalty, and the willingness of others to sacrifice. Harry and Dumbledore were not seduced by old legends. They used Voldemort's predictability against him, following his obsession like a trail of breadcrumbs. Even the Deathly Hallows did not interest him the way Hogwarts relics did. Despite knowing about the Elder Wand, he saw it only as a tool of conquest. He never tried to understand the Hallows' deeper meaning. His entire worldview was so mired in Slytherin's legacy that he could not fathom magic that wasn't about dominance or fear. He ignored the resurrection stone hidden in the gaunt ring because it did not fit his purpose. His obsession was so consuming he failed to see that he had literally cursed himself by turning that same ring into a horcrux. It was not just arrogance, it was tunnel vision. Consider how Dumbledore deciphered his plans. He knew Voldemort wanted items of significance, and he correctly predicted which Founder's relics Voldemort would use. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore even remarks, "It will be his crowning triumph to have stolen the last of the Hogwarts Founder's treasures." This was not some prophetic brilliance on Dumbledore's part. It was simply understanding Voldemort's need to advertise his lineage. Dumbledore knew that Voldemort wanted to make a point with every horcrux, that he alone was worthy of Slytherin's mantle. In doing so, Voldemort practically handed his enemies a map. Harry himself benefited from this predictability. The hunt for horcruxes was not a random search, it was a study of Voldemort's character. They looked for places he valued, objects he revered. Ron described this in Deathly Hallows when he said Voldemort wouldn't hide horcruxes under a mattress. He had too much pride. His contempt for others' intelligence blinded him to the idea that they could think like him, predict him, even beat him at his own game. It wasn't just that Voldemort was evil, it was that he was dull in his devotion to symbolism. The destruction of the diary during Harry's second year was the first crack in this grand strategy. Even then, Voldemort underestimated how anyone could have guessed its significance. He dismissed Lucius Malfoy's carelessness without questioning his own. The diary was not just a horcrux, it was his boast that he alone could open the Chamber of Secrets. Harry did it too. The fact that Harry could speak Parseltongue, a gift Voldemort thought unique, exposed how easily his heir of Slytherin shtick could be replicated and defeated. He thought he was preserving a legacy. In reality, he turned it into a weakness anyone could exploit. Number 18. Inability to compromise. Lord Voldemort's downfall can be traced to a single glaring flaw, his stubborn, unyielding refusal to consider compromise as anything other than a temporary lie. His entire campaign was built on domination through fear, a strategy that left him bereft of true allies and ensured that every alliance he created was brittle, hollow, and prone to betrayal. He saw negotiation as weakness, refusing to understand that successful conquest was as much about forging coalitions as it was about defeating enemies. This flaw is woven throughout the Harry Potter books with startling clarity, from his recruitment of the Giants to his treatment of his own Death Eaters. Even his interactions with Severus Snape exposed this failure. Voldemort could not see loyalty as something earned through mutual respect, only enforced by terror. This blindness made him vulnerable to those who understood the value of choice and trust, like Dumbledore, whose strength lay precisely in persuading others to follow willingly rather than out of fear. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says of Voldemort, "You are quite right. Voldemort is not afraid of the dead, But you, Harry, you are not a killer. This distinction points to more than moral difference. It reveals Voldemort's total inability to grasp the power of human connection. He sees every relationship as a transaction to be exploited, every truce as a ruse to buy time before betrayal, even when he needs help most. Desperately, such as when approaching the Giants for support, he sends Death Eaters to threaten, intimidate, and bribe them, failing to see that these methods breed resentment and disloyalty. The Giants ultimately fight for him, yes, but they do so with no real stake in his success, and they are as destructive to his cause as they are to his enemies. His alliances are not based on shared vision or promise of a better future, only on fear and greed, forces that evaporate the moment he seems weak. Consider the way Voldemort treats his inner circle. Bellatrix Lestrange is slavishly devoted to him, but her fanaticism is an exception rather than the rule. Even among the Death Eaters, Voldemort sows division, mistrust, and terror. He routinely punishes failure with torture or death, as when he has Lucius Malfoy disgraced and deprived of his wand in the Deathly Hallows. This approach ensures obedience but not loyalty. It means that at the first sign of his downfall, his followers scatter or turn on each other. The cowardice displayed during the Battle of Hogwarts, when many Death Eaters flee as Voldemort's power wavers, is the inevitable result of a leader who offers nothing but threats. There is no loyalty among people who are treated as disposable tools. Voldemort cannot fathom that a follower might remain true if given respect or shared purpose. The contrast with Dumbledore's Order of the Phoenix is stark. The Order is built on shared ideals and voluntary sacrifice. Its members disagree and argue, but they stay because they believe in the cause and in each other. Even Severus Snape, a man who hates Harry, remains loyal to Dumbledore's plan because of a promise rooted in love and grief, emotions Voldemort dismisses as weaknesses. Voldemort cannot inspire this kind of allegiance because he cannot see its value. When he recruits, he offers power or threatens destruction. There is no middle ground, no appeal to higher purpose. This is why he fails to hold the loyalty of creatures like the werewolves, who serve him only so long as they fear the alternative, or the Giants, who are as likely to destroy his allies as his enemies. A particularly telling example of Voldemort's blind rejection of diplomacy is seen in his approach to Hogwarts itself. When he takes control of the school in the Deathly Hallows, he does not seek to win the hearts and minds of students or staff. Instead, he installs Severus Snape as headmaster under threat, while letting the Carrows brutalize the students. Even if Snape secretly protects some children, the overall message is clear: comply or suffer. There is no effort to persuade the wizarding population that Voldemort's rule offers any benefit. Contrast this with Dumbledore, who believed education could shape the future and worked to mend divisions, even inviting Firenze the Centaur to teach. Divination to bridge human-centaur tensions. Voldemort would never dream of such a gesture, seeing cooperation as unworthy of a conqueror. Throughout the series, Voldemort's contempt for compromise alienates even those he might have won. His disdain for non-pureblood wizards is so absolute that he cannot see the strategic benefit of recruiting them, despite their numbers and talents. The entire half-blood and muggle-born population is pushed to resist him to the last. His anti-muggle-born ideology is not merely prejudice, but an active tactical liability. By refusing any overture or concession, he unites his enemies in opposition. He cannot see the wisdom in a partial concession or limited autonomy, strategies that real dictators throughout history have used to keep subject populations too divided to rebel. His rigid, scorched earth policy ensures universal opposition, as those with no stake in his victory will fight to the bitter end. Voldemort's inability to trust anyone also cripples his intelligence gathering. He relies on spies like Yaxley, but his cruelty makes them self-serving and afraid to share bad news. He cannot accept that even his own agents might hold information he does not have, so they tell him what he wants to hear. By contrast, Dumbledore trusts his network even when they fail him. He knows that trust is not about perfection, but about resilience and loyalty. Voldemort, lacking this perspective, dismisses the possibility of genuine alliance or even partnership. He does not see that fear limits what people will tell you, creating a leadership. Environment of dangerous ignorance. This contributes to his catastrophic mistake at the Department of Mysteries, where he assumes Harry will be lured in without realizing that the Order will anticipate the trap. Even his treatment of Severus Snape illustrates his blindness to compromise. Snape is one of his most valuable assets, a skilled occlumens and spy who feeds him critical information. Yet Voldemort never offers Snape trust or respect. He treats him as a useful but expendable servant. When Voldemort learns of the Elder Wand's supposed loyalty to Snape, he kills him without hesitation, assuming the wand will transfer allegiance. This brutal calculation ignores the nuance of wand lore and dismisses the possibility that Snape might have shared vital knowledge if treated with even a shred of respect. The fact that Snape ultimately works against Voldemort at great personal risk is a testament to how Voldemort's refusal to offer any genuine loyalty results in betrayal from the very people he needs most. A quote from the Half-Blood Prince summarizes Voldemort's flaw in Dumbledore's words: "You place too much importance, and you always have done, on the so-called purity of blood. You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." Voldemort's rigid ideology blinds him to the reality that people can change, that enemies can become allies through negotiation and respect. He cannot imagine offering amnesty or autonomy to Muggleborns in exchange for peace because he does not want peace, only domination. Any compromise feels like surrender. Yet this obsession with absolute victory is precisely what ensures he cannot achieve it. A more pragmatic leader would have split the opposition with targeted concessions and selective mercy, leaving Dumbledore's side weakened and divided. Another key failure is seen in his recruitment of the Dementors. Voldemort does not negotiate with them in any meaningful sense. He merely unleashes them with promises of free rein to feed. They have no reason to remain loyal once the tide turns. When the Ministry falls, the Dementors serve him gladly, but they are not controlled. They create such fear and misery that even neutral witches and wizards are driven into resistance. He weaponizes terror so indiscriminately that it becomes self-defeating, galvanizing the very resistance he hopes to crush. Had he tried to incorporate them with any sense of restraint or rules, he might have maintained their allegiance more securely, but compromise is not in his nature. Voldemort's rejection of compromise also defines his approach to the Ministry of Magic. Rather than attempt to corrupt it gradually or share power to keep it pliant, he replaces it with a puppet regime of terror. The Muggleborn Registration Commission is a perfect example of policy designed to humiliate and brutalize rather than govern. This alienates even purebloods uncomfortable with such open cruelty. It is bad politics. By failing to offer any faction a stake in his rule, he guarantees universal hatred. Meanwhile, Dumbledore's side, despite internal arguments, remains united by a shared vision of protecting the vulnerable. Voldemort cannot see that compromise, even cynical compromise, would make his rule more sustainable. His failure is also clear in how he treats magical creatures. He sees goblins as untrustworthy and refuses to consider meaningful partnership. This is fatal, given their control of Gringotts. His robbery of the Lestrange vault destroys any chance of working with goblins. They turn on him immediately when Harry appeals to their sense of betrayal and greed. Voldemort cannot understand that shared interest, not fear alone, is the basis of real alliance. Griphook's treachery is not because goblins are inherently disloyal, but because Voldemort refuses to treat them as equals in any negotiation. Voldemort's greatest error, then, is his inability to see that power built solely on fear is brittle. The prophecy itself, which he fears and obsesses over, is only fulfilled because he refuses alternatives. He cannot imagine that letting Harry live might diffuse the threat. He cannot see that accepting a world in which he is not supreme would be safer than creating one where everyone conspires to destroy him. When he kills Harry in the Forbidden Forest, he believes this final act of domination will secure his rule, not realizing that he has ensured his own destruction by misunderstanding love, sacrifice, and loyalty, concepts inseparable from compromise. At the end, Voldemort's approach to alliances, strategy, and leadership is marked by a total incapacity to understand the need for compromise. He sees only enemies and tools, never partners. This is why he stands alone at the final duel, friendless and desperate, while Harry is surrounded by allies who choose to fight for him, even knowing the cost. Voldemort loses not because he is less clever or less powerful, but because he refuses to recognize that true power lies in the ability to unite others, to build trust, and to compromise when necessary. His failure to understand this truth is the fatal blindness that undoes even the darkest wizard of all time. Number 19. Overestimating his own invulnerability. Tom Riddle was always proud of his intelligence, but it was precisely this certainty in his genius that forged the prison of his destiny. When he first discovered the concept of horcruxes, he treated mortality as a puzzle to solve rather than a truth to accept. He split his soul without remorse, planting pieces into objects that seemed unassailable. The diary that bewitched Ginny Weasley, the locket of Salazar Slytherin, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff. In his mind, these tokens were his insurance against death. Yet the very act of dividing himself so wantonly was the seed of his ruin, for by assuming himself untouchable, he neglected to see that he was making himself vulnerable to the one thing he believed he had conquered: human error. Voldemort never paused to consider that the same mind capable of creating horcruxes might also be clever enough to find and destroy them. He underestimated Albus Dumbledore's tireless pursuit of truth, the old wizard's patient unraveling of his secrets, the way the headmaster pieced together the mystery of the horcruxes through hints left by Creature, Regulus Black, and the charmed memories of Slughorn. Even when Harry Potter survived the killing curse as a baby, Voldemort could not grasp the significance. He dismissed it as an aberration rather than a clue that his supposed invincibility was anything but certain. He did not think he could be beaten because he did not believe there was anyone worthy of such a triumph. When Voldemort regained his body in the graveyard, he exulted in his return. He mocked Harry, forced him to duel, relished in demonstrating his power before his Death Eaters. "Bow to death, Harry," the book records, describing his arrogance in the face of the boy who had defied him. But in that moment, he made a critical mistake. He did not kill Harry immediately when he had the chance. He wanted to savor it, to perform for his followers. His self-image as an all-powerful warlord demanded an audience for his triumph. That self-indulgence was not tactical brilliance, but self-sabotage born of pride. He could not see that Harry's survival was not just luck, but a warning that something fundamental in his worldview was wrong. At Hogwarts, Voldemort dismissed Severus Snape's nuanced intelligence even as he used the man for his own ends. Snape was the very portrait of subtlety and cunning, a true Slytherin, but Voldemort viewed even his most capable follower as disposable. He killed Snape to take the Elder Wand, convinced that murdering its previous master would win its allegiance, but he misunderstood the wand's loyalty, ignoring the deeper rules of wand law. He could not fathom that Snape had never truly mastered the wand. He failed to see the irony that while he prized power, he disdained knowledge that might have given him real mastery. Snape's death was not victory, it was waste, proving Voldemort's belief in brute force over wisdom. Throughout the final battle, Voldemort's strategy exposed his overconfidence. He believed his numbers, his giants and werewolves and Death Eaters, would simply overwhelm Hogwarts. He did not consider that Neville Longbottom would kill Nagini with Gryffindor's sword, ending the last horcrux he so arrogantly believed would shield him. He did not think Harry would willingly walk to his own death in the forest, offering himself up as sacrifice to protect his friends, a choice Voldemort, who never valued love or loyalty, could not understand. The arrogance that made him split his soul blinded him to the notion that others might put themselves back together through sacrifice and unity. Even when faced with clear signs that his horcruxes were failing him, Voldemort clung to his sense of invincibility. He felt it when Harry destroyed the diary in the Chamber of Secrets, and when Dumbledore destroyed the ring. But he rationalized these defeats as isolated events, rather than part of a coherent strategy against him. He could not believe anyone was his equal in intellect or magic, so he refused to accept that someone could be dismantling his supposed immortality piece by piece. He never imagined that Hermione Granger would research horcruxes obsessively, or that Ron Weasley, often overlooked as dull-witted, would destroy one with the sword of Gryffindor. Voldemort's downfall lay in his failure to understand the nature of fear. He sowed it freely, ruling his followers through terror. Bellatrix Lestrange adored him fanatically, but most Death Eaters followed him because they were afraid. This kind of loyalty is brittle. When Harry offered them mercy in the Great Hall, many defected or fled. Voldemort never considered that fear is a poor foundation for true allegiance. He could not see that the very cruelty that made him fearsome also made his army unreliable in the face of real resistance. His understanding of human nature was stunted by his belief that all people were like him, ambitious, selfish, power-hungry. He dismissed the possibility that even house elves and goblins could turn against him. Griphook helped Harry, Ron, and Hermione break into Bellatrix's vault, freeing Hufflepuff's cup from its so-called security. Creature, whom Voldemort tormented by forcing him to drink the Inferi-infested potion, turned loyal to Harry instead. Voldemort treated magical beings as mere tools, incapable of agency or rebellion. His inability to respect any life form led directly to betrayals he never anticipated. In the end, his refusal to see others as anything but pawns was the undoing of the grand game he thought he was playing so brilliantly. Consider the Elder Wand itself, a symbol of his entire philosophy of dominance. He wanted it because it was reputedly unbeatable. He did not stop to ask why so many powerful wizards who possessed it had died. He believed the wand would serve him because he was Voldemort, ignoring that its loyalty was tied to mastery, not murder. In his final confrontation, Harry tells him, "You're the one who killed Snape, but the wand isn't yours." Voldemort's expression of rage was the rage of a man realizing too late that he never understood the weapon he had placed all his faith in. He saw magic as power over others, never as a discipline with rules that must be understood and respected. Voldemort's self-mythologizing was thorough. He refused to use the name Tom Riddle because he saw it as weak, mundane, human. He thought he had transcended his origins, but that refusal to acknowledge who he really was made him blind to his own motives and weaknesses. Harry, in contrast, accepted his heritage, his connection to his parents, even the part of Voldemort's soul lodged in his scar. Harry's strength came from accepting truth, even painful truth, while Voldemort's fatal flaw was denying it. His entire plan for immortality was built on a lie he told himself, that he could escape the limits of mortality without consequence. Even among his Death Eaters, Voldemort's arrogance was corrosive. He mocked Lucius Malfoy for his failures, broke Draco Malfoy's wand, and used Narcissa's fear for her son against her. He never imagined that Narcissa would lie to him in the Forbidden Forest, telling him Harry was dead when he was alive. He did not think anyone would dare deceive him to protect their child. His scorn for their humanity blinded him to its power. He never understood that love could breed both courage and treachery, depending on how it was provoked. He saw love as weakness and thus never grasped its capacity to undermine his rule. Throughout the books, Voldemort's cruelty is documented in chilling detail. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, he murders Bertha Jorkins because she was inconvenient after giving him useful information. He sees the lives of others as disposable, tools to be broken. Yet even the process of breaking people can create witnesses, memories, and revenge. His many killings and tortures left behind not just corpses but clues, enemies, and alliances among those who wanted to see him fall. He thought terror would silence them all, but it only deepened their determination to resist. Number 20. Neglecting ancient magic beyond his interests. Tom Riddle was a boy who scoured the Hogwarts library for secrets no other student dared to touch, but as Lord Voldemort he made a fatal choice, to study only that which promised power and terror, ignoring anything that did not serve his narrow obsession with domination and immortality. He was brilliant beyond measure, a duelist of terrifying skill, the creator of multiple horcruxes, a feat so vile it was considered legend, but his genius was lopsided. Dumbledore once warned Harry that Voldemort had never had a friend, nor did he ever desire one. And this emotional void shaped the limits of his magical education. He dismissed protective enchantments as lesser work for sentimental fools and scoffed at the idea that healing magic, old marriage rites, or ancient pacts could contain any power worth learning. In this pride, he failed to understand the deepest truth of magic in the wizarding world, that the oldest spells were born from human bonds, and that love itself was a force of formidable ancient magic. It was this arrogant rejection of knowledge outside his sphere of interest that laid the trap he would never see coming. Voldemort spent years unraveling the mysteries of horcruxes, splitting his soul, anchoring himself to life with a precision that terrified even Horace Slughorn. He knew the mechanics of death better than any wizard in living memory, but he refused to study the equally ancient magic of blood protections and sacrificial enchantments. When he killed Lily Potter, he triggered one of the oldest forms of protective magic, an act rooted in a sacrifice freely given. This ancient ward, simple, primal, but deep as time, latched on to Harry and later protected him at Privet Drive through Petunia Dursley's blood. Voldemort never paused to ask why such old protections might exist or how they might work. His self-limiting obsession made him blind to their power. Even in his school days, Tom Riddle displayed this narrowness. He learned everything Hogwarts had to offer about curses and hexes. He was said to be the most brilliant student Hogwarts had ever seen, according to Slughorn, but he had no patience for the healing spells taught by Madame Pomfrey or the old rites preserved by the ancient runes class. Hermione Granger, by contrast, studied runes precisely because they unlocked ancient forms of magic lost to ordinary wizards. It is telling that while Voldemort could split his soul with the foulest rites, he could not decipher the full significance of a simple, rune-carved grave in Godric's Hollow. The Dark Lord saw only what he wished to see, symbols of power and terror, never of union or sacrifice. Voldemort also overlooked the deep-rooted magic of wizarding alliances and old oaths. The unbreakable vow was not his creation, but a piece of ancient, magical contract law that bound Severus Snape to protect Draco Malfoy. Voldemort had no real mastery over these kinds of binding agreements, no sense of why wizards would commit themselves so irrevocably to one another. When he needed loyalty, he used fear and torture. He could never have imagined that Dumbledore's loyalty from the Order of the Phoenix rested not on threats, but on shared values, and that the magic of that unity was a defense he could not break. His ignorance of these social magical contracts meant he constantly misjudged how wizards might defy him in unexpected, magically binding ways. Albus Dumbledore, by comparison, was a student of every branch of magic, no matter how obscure or unglamorous. He had studied alchemy with Nicholas Flamel. He had pored over ancient treatises on love magic, believing, as he told Harry, that love is the most powerful force in the world. He understood blood magic well enough to craft the plan that kept Harry safe in Privet Drive, and well enough to know that Voldemort's rebirth ritual using Harry's blood would tether Harry's life to Voldemort's own mortality. Dumbledore's broad, humble curiosity meant he knew about ancient protections Voldemort dismissed as old wives' tales. It was precisely Voldemort's disdain for such knowledge that kept him from realizing he was building his own doom. Voldemort also failed to appreciate the subtleties of healing magic, which might seem irrelevant to conquest but is as old as any dark curse. The ability to heal was more than a set of spells. It was the study of restoring balance and life, a philosophy Voldemort rejected completely. He had no idea how to heal a fractured soul. He could only destroy and divide. Dumbledore warned Harry that remorse was the only cure for a split soul, something Voldemort would never allow himself to feel. He treated the soul as a thing to be mutilated and stored, never understanding the ancient wisdom that true power over life and death lies in mending, not breaking. The old magic of blood pacts and lineage also lay beyond Voldemort's understanding, despite its relevance to his own defeat. The fact that he was a descendant of Salazar Slytherin gave him pride, but he never respected the ways ancient families wove their own protections through bloodlines. The House of Potter had its own line of protections, not merely in blood, but in the traditions of sacrifice and loyalty. When Lily invoked that ancient magic, she activated a defense Voldemort could not counter, precisely because he never considered that anyone would willingly die for another. He dismissed such choices as weakness. He never asked why magical families taught these traditions or why they endured for centuries. Nor did Voldemort take seriously the power of magical artifacts beyond those designed to kill or control. He saw the Elder Wand as the ultimate prize, and yet he failed to appreciate the history of its mastery. The wand chooses the wizard, Ollivander told Harry, but Voldemort believed only in brute possession. He did not study wand lore as deeply as he might have, missing clues that mastery required more than theft. His failure to learn the subtleties of wand allegiance let Harry beat him with a simple truth about ownership. Again, this was ancient magic rooted in wizards' relationships with their wands and with each other, connections Voldemort refused to honor or even notice. Voldemort's contempt for old magical customs also left him unprepared for the protective magic of Hogwarts itself. The school was filled with wards and enchantments placed over centuries by generations of headmasters and founders. Dumbledore understood these protections intimately. When the Order of the Phoenix used Grimmauld Place as headquarters, it was protected by the Fidelius Charm, itself a piece of complex ancient magic requiring trust. Voldemort preferred to break things and intimidate people rather than master these layered defenses. In so doing, he made Hogwarts his enemy in ways he never understood. He thought he could simply march in with brute force and bend it to his will, but the castle resisted, loyal to its protectors and traditions. The most damning example of Voldemort's failure to study older magic came at the moment of Harry's final sacrifice. When Harry willingly walked to his death in the forest, he recreated Lily's protection for all who fought for him. Voldemort never grasped why this worked. He saw Harry's walk into the forest as foolish bravado, not realizing that in accepting death to save his friends, Harry had invoked ancient protective magic that spread through everyone he died to protect. This was magic older than curses and older than horcruxes. Voldemort never bothered to understand it because it did not fit his philosophy of fear and dominance. Even in the ritual of his own rebirth, Voldemort failed to see the significance of the blood he took from Harry. He believed it would negate the protection by taking it inside himself, a grotesque misreading of blood magic's meaning. As Dumbledore explained, it instead bound Voldemort to the life of the boy he sought to kill, keeping Harry alive to return and defeat him. Voldemort's ignorance of these old rules was not a minor oversight, but a catastrophic miscalculation rooted in arrogance. He misapplied a piece of blood magic he did not fully understand and handed Harry the key to surviving the killing curse. Voldemort's leadership style reflected this same magical myopia. He demanded blind obedience, punished failure with torture, and built loyalty on fear. He never explored the ancient traditions of leadership that created unbreakable oaths of service, the kind that might bind followers not with terror, but with shared purpose. He dismissed the magical binding of trust as weakness, failing to see that Snape's unbreakable vow, or Narcissa Malfoy's quiet lie to him about Harry's death, were rooted in a different kind of loyalty he had never mastered. Even the Death Eaters served him from fear, not true allegiance, and so they were unreliable when the final battle came. In the end, Voldemort was a master of some of the darkest and most complex magic known, but he was willfully ignorant of half of magic's nature. He saw spells only as weapons, never as shields. He scorned the old rites that made alliances stronger, protected families, or healed broken bodies and souls. He believed dominance was the only real power and built his entire magical education around that idea. This made him brilliant in one domain, but childishly unprepared in others. He made himself an expert in killing, but remained a novice in understanding why wizards would choose to save one another. Harry Potter's survival was not simply the result of luck or prophecy, but of ancient magic Voldemort refused to study. When Dumbledore told Harry, "You are protected in short by your ability to love," he was naming the real source of Voldemort's defeat. It was not merely an emotional platitude, but a statement of magical fact. Lily's sacrifice, Harry's acceptance of death, the loyalty of friends, all were part of an older magical tradition that Voldemort ignored at his peril. His refusal to see value in these traditions blinded him to the very forces that could stop him. In the end, it was not Harry's skill with Expelliarmus or his courage alone that killed Voldemort, but Voldemort's own failures of imagination and study. He never thought to ask why these old customs and ancient magics existed, or why wizards bothered to pass them down. He dismissed them as primitive and sentimental, never seeing that they endured because they worked. By refusing to learn anything outside his obsession with power and terror, Voldemort left himself vulnerable to the oldest magic of all, the magic of sacrifice, loyalty, and love. And so, with all his brilliance, he fell to the simplest and deepest truth of the wizarding world, a truth he had every chance to study but never did. Number 21. Ignoring loyalty in enemy alliances. Lord Voldemort, in all his vainglorious quest for power, revealed a profound and almost childish blindness when he believed that terror alone could dissolve the bonds that made the Order of the Phoenix resilient. He miscalculated spectacularly, thinking that if he killed enough fathers, mothers, daughters, and sons, the survivors would surrender, shattered and broken, unable to lift their wands again. Yet the truth, as he never understood it, was that fear can fracture the weak but cannot crush the devoted. When Alastor Moody fell, when Remus Lupin was hunted, when the Weasleys' home was targeted, the Order did not scatter in dread. Instead, they drew tighter together, fortified by the same affection and trust Voldemort had dismissed as sentimental nonsense. In the final battle at Hogwarts, this unity emerged as an unstoppable force, and Voldemort's armies, bound by obligation and terror rather than loyalty, crumbled at the edges. Sirius Black's death exemplified Voldemort's failure to understand that love, once awakened, cannot be strangled by grief. Harry Potter carried Sirius's memory like a talisman, and the pain of that loss became not a weakness, but an iron will to stand against the Dark Lord. In Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore quietly observed, "You care so much you feel as though you will bleed to death with the pain of it." But Voldemort never believed caring was anything other than an exploitable flaw. He saw the hearts of others as soft targets, never imagining that from these wounds could spring a resolve stronger than any unforgivable curse. The Death Eaters themselves were a mirror image of this error. They did not fight beside Voldemort out of genuine allegiance. Narcissa Malfoy proved this conclusively when she lied to his face in the Forbidden Forest, caring nothing for his victory if it meant losing her son. Bellatrix Lestrange was perhaps the only one who worshipped him beyond fear, but her madness made her an unreliable weapon. The rest, Lucius Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, clung to Voldemort's coattails only because terror pinned them there. They betrayed each other, as cowards always do. The Order, in contrast, risked everything for one another. When George Weasley lost an ear, it was not vengeance that fueled the rescue, but the unspoken knowledge that no friend would ever be abandoned. Even Severus Snape, a figure shrouded in ambiguity, demonstrates how Voldemort's blindness to loyalty destroyed his own power. Voldemort never bothered to ask himself why Snape continued to grieve for Lily Potter, never suspected that a man's love, buried under bitterness and regret, could remain untouched by years of darkness. When he killed Lily, Voldemort thought he was erasing all resistance, never imagining her sacrifice would create a protection he could not break. In the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore told Harry, "To have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever." Voldemort laughed at such words, scorning the idea that love had power, and in that scorn lay the seeds of his undoing. During the infiltration of the Ministry, the Order's members relied not only on strategic plans but on implicit trust. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Tonks, and Arthur Weasley each risked exposure and death, sustained by their faith in one another. Voldemort's spies watched the corridors and interrogated employees, but they never truly understood why their efforts failed to unravel these conspiracies. The Death Eaters assumed that if they could terrorize enough clerks and aurors, the Ministry would be theirs in spirit as well as in name. Instead, hidden alliances forged through years of camaraderie flourished in secret. Every whispered warning passed between old friends became another quiet act of resistance. Dumbledore's army, too, grew precisely because Voldemort could not conceive of loyalty that sprang from shared ideals rather than shared fear. In the Room of Requirement, Neville Longbottom and Ginny Weasley kept the torch burning, despite having every reason to hide. When Voldemort returned, he expected the students to cower, but their ranks only multiplied. Their loyalty to Harry and to Hogwarts itself was a rebellion that no curse could stamp out. Even the Carrows, whose punishments were designed to breed submission, only deepened the resolve of these young fighters. The spirit of Dumbledore's army became the unbroken thread connecting the first resistance to the final stand. Throughout these years, Voldemort kept returning to the same tactic: intimidation. He used it like a hammer, convinced that no wall could withstand it forever, but he never noticed that each strike merely chipped away his own credibility. As the stories spread, of families murdered, of innocents tortured, he inspired hatred as much as fear. Those who might have remained neutral began to see the Dark Lord as an enemy of decency itself. When Aberforth Dumbledore sheltered fugitives in the Hog's Head, he did so not for glory, but because the cause was too righteous to ignore. Voldemort believed cruelty would make the world cower. In truth, it galvanized all those with a shred of conscience. One of the most striking examples of Voldemort's miscalculation was the Battle of the Seven Potters. Every member of the escort risked certain death to protect Harry. Hagrid, despite his vulnerability to curses, volunteered without hesitation. Remus Lupin and Mad-Eye Moody, both veterans of the First War, stepped into the sky knowing they might never land again. Voldemort, watching from above, saw only foolish sentimentality. He never asked himself why so many would be willing to die for a boy. To him, the idea that love could compel such sacrifice was absurd. Yet that single night demonstrated that devotion is more contagious than fear, and Harry survived because the people around him were bound by something Voldemort's legions could never imitate. When Harry walked into the forest to meet his own death, it was the final proof of Voldemort's blindness. No soldier driven by terror alone would have done the same. Harry was not compelled by force. He was carried forward by the memory of all who loved him and by his determination to spare them further pain. In that moment, the supposed weakness of affection became a power greater than any horcrux. Voldemort's supporters were scattered, many already plotting their escape, while the Order and the students stood in defiance. Even in the hour of apparent defeat, they refused to kneel. This was the strength Voldemort could neither fathom nor conquer. Among the Death Eaters, suspicion and rivalry festered because their allegiance was transactional. Each one waited for the others to fall so that he might inherit favor. In Deathly Hallows, Voldemort's treatment of Lucius Malfoy, stripping him of dignity and mocking his failures, exposed the hollowness of these alliances. By contrast, the Order's bonds were not transactional but woven from shared sacrifice. Molly Weasley did not stand against Bellatrix Lestrange because she was ordered to. She did so because no mother could watch her daughter threatened without unleashing all the fury in her soul. That courage erupted not from fear of punishment but from love, a reality Voldemort never respected. Even the ghosts of Hogwarts seemed to embody this contrast. They lingered not in terror, but in devotion to the school and its people. The house elves, so often overlooked, chose to fight. Creature, once a venomous servant of the Black family's darkest traditions, led the Kitchens into battle because Harry had shown him kindness. Voldemort, who believed all creatures existed only to be dominated, never imagined a house elf might willingly untake up arms against him. In this way, the very beings he scorned became part of the rebellion he could not extinguish. In the end, Voldemort mistook domination for allegiance and underestimated the invisible threads binding friends, families, and allies. He imagined that victory was measured by how many bodies lay in his path. He never understood that the living would rise again and again so long as they believed they were fighting for each other. His arrogance made him blind to the simplest truth: the deeper the love between allies, the less power fear has over them. And when the hour came to reckon with that truth, he found himself alone, surrounded not by brothers in arms, but by cowards awaiting the fall of their master. Number 22. Relying on fear over persuasion. Voldemort's greatest flaw was not simply his cruelty, but the blindness with which he wielded it. He thought that fear was the sharpest of weapons, the surest of foundations, and so he built his entire regime on terror. His Death Eaters followed him not out of love for his cause, nor even real belief in it, but because they feared him more than anything else. Bellatrix Lestrange is often offered as proof of fanatical loyalty, yet even she was addicted not to ideology but to his power, the sick thrill of violence that he encouraged. When the Ministry fell, the wizarding world did not rise to welcome him as a liberator. Instead it fell silent, sullen, and resentful, forced to obey because the alternative was torture, imprisonment, or death. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore warns Harry it was, I think, the fear of death which inspired Lord Voldemort's attacks on others. His armies were reflections of that fear, a trembling mob held at one point. This blindness was not a tactical oversight but a deep limitation in his character. Voldemort could not understand persuasion, for he himself was incapable of being persuaded. His entire life was an exercise in domination. He did not value minds that questioned him or challenged him. He wanted only obedience. When he recruited the Malfoys, he used their ambition and fear of social disgrace. When he approached Fenrir Greyback, he used the threat of unrestrained violence. He never offered a positive vision, never invited people to imagine a better world under his rule. It was always, serve me or suffer. The Dark Mark was a brand of ownership, not of fellowship. Even his inner circle was marked by paranoia, as seen in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows when Voldemort chooses to take Lucius Malfoy's wand without thanks, leaving the man humiliated, terrified, and deeply resentful. The difference between fear and trust was nowhere clearer than in the comparison to Dumbledore's leadership. Where Voldemort saw subordinates, Dumbledore saw allies. He never forced anyone to fight for him, yet people would willingly lay down their lives at his side. Even Severus Snape, arguably the most morally ambiguous of Dumbledore's supporters, acted from complicated, painful loyalty. Dumbledore knew that Snape had murdered in rage and regret, but he offered him something Voldemort never could, a chance for redemption, trust despite past sins. Dumbledore says in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Voldemort, obsessed with ability alone, could never see the power in choice. Consider the collapse of Voldemort's power after his first fall. The Death Eaters did not rally to find him. They scattered like cockroaches when the light came on. Many claimed they had been imperious, others fled or went into hiding. Even the ones who had been most eager to commit atrocities turned on him without a second thought. Peter Pettigrew, who later resurrected him, did so not out of loyalty, but out of his own craven fear of other Death Eaters. Voldemort might have inspired terror, but he did not inspire faith. He had built nothing that could last without him, no ideals, no real cause. Fear is a brittle glue. It cracks at the first sign of stress. His second reign revealed the same fault lines. Though the ministry fell quickly, the wizarding population was not truly converted. Families like the Weasleys and the Longbottoms went underground. Students at Hogwarts resisted under Neville Longbottom's leadership. Even those who appeared to collaborate did so with eyes cast to the floor, hoping to avoid attention. When Harry walked into the Great Hall before the final battle, the students did not cower. They gathered around him. Voldemort had not convinced them of his vision. He had simply frightened them into silence. The moment that silence broke, his power collapsed. This failure to persuade was fatal in every sense. Even his supposed allies waited for a chance to betray him. Draco Malfoy, raised on pure blood ideology, could not bring himself to identify Harry at Malfoy Manor. Narcissa Malfoy lied to Voldemort about Harry's death out of love for her son, not loyalty to the Dark Lord. These were his most privileged followers, the family he had relied upon to enforce his rule at the Ministry. Yet, in the end, they defected without hesitation when given the chance. Voldemort's entire army was riddled with these silent mutineers, people serving only as long as they were too terrified to do anything else. Contrast this with the loyalty that Dumbledore inspired even after death. The Order of the Phoenix did not disband because their leader fell. Instead, they regrouped. Kingsley Shacklebolt and Minerva McGonagall held the line at Hogwarts. Lupin, Tonks, and Moody risked their lives to protect Harry. Their loyalty was not enforced with threats, but born of shared purpose. Dumbledore had built a movement, one that survived him because it was rooted in genuine belief. Even Harry, who so often struggled with Dumbledore's secrecy, continued his mission, convinced that defeating Voldemort was not only necessary, but right. There was also Voldemort's inability to trust anyone, which poisoned his entire command. He refused to share power, let alone responsibility. When he returned, he refused even to tell most of his Death Eaters about the horcruxes. This secrecy was not strategic brilliance, but a symptom of his fear of betrayal. Ironically, it guaranteed betrayal. No one knew the true stakes. No one could guard them properly. When Regulus Black discovered what the locket was, he turned against Voldemort. Kreacher, whom Voldemort dismissed as worthless, later helped Harry destroy that same horcrux. Voldemort's refusal to treat his followers as partners destroyed him from within. One can see this blind cruelty in his treatment of Snape, the most valuable of his spies. He trusted Snape only so far as the man's usefulness extended. Even when Snape killed Dumbledore on Voldemort's orders, Voldemort never rewarded him with anything but suspicion. When Voldemort believed the Elder Wand's power was blocked by Snape's continued life, he murdered him without hesitation or remorse. Voldemort saw no contradiction in killing his most effective lieutenant because he could not comprehend loyalty that wasn't enforced by terror. His understanding of leadership was so limited he thought killing Snape was a tactical necessity, never realizing he was cutting his own throat. There is a terrible irony in Voldemort's rise to power. He was charismatic, but his charisma was corrupted by sadism. At Hogwarts, Tom Riddle could charm and flatter teachers like Slughorn, but he quickly outgrew persuasion because it required understanding others. Fear was easier. He could impose it without effort, without compromise. When he returned as Voldemort, he had lost even the capacity to pretend to care what others wanted. His recruitment pitch was not "join me in building a better world," but "join me or I will kill you." That approach, while effective in the short term, seeded his defeat from the start. This failure is revealed in the behavior of his followers at crucial moments. At Malfoy Manor, when Voldemort's anger flared, even Bellatrix cowered. No one offered advice or a plan. They trembled and waited to be punished. When Harry and his friends escaped, it was chaos and blame-shifting. They were not partners in conquest, but hostages to his violence. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Voldemort returns from killing Harry, expecting adoration. Instead, he finds confusion and terror. Even then, he cannot see it. He believes shouting at the survivors will keep them silent. He cannot fathom that they hate him so thoroughly that they would rather die than serve him. One need only look at the Battle of Hogwarts to see the proof of Voldemort's failure to win hearts. The defenders were outnumbered and outgunned. Many were students. Yet they fought with desperate courage because they believed Voldemort's world was a nightmare. Voldemort tried to buy their surrender with threats, offering them clemency if they turned over Harry. But that offer revealed the weakness in his hold. It admitted that he could not simply command them. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, he demands over the enchanted voice, "I do not wish to spill any more blood." But the defenders knew he would spill it anyway. No one trusted him, and so no one gave in. Voldemort's approach to governance was equally revealing. His ministry was a puppet state defined by terror raids, interrogations, and censorship. Muggle-born registration commissions existed not to serve justice, but to terrify people into compliance. Hogwarts under the Carrows became a training ground for cruelty, but cruelty did not produce conviction. Instead, it turned children into rebels. Neville Longbottom, once shy and uncertain, became a leader because Voldemort's regime taught him what real evil looked like. In the end, Voldemort educated a generation to hate him more fiercely than their parents had. Even the Dementors, creatures of fear incarnate, ultimately betrayed Voldemort. They abandoned his side when the tide turned. Their loyalty was transactional. They followed the promise of souls to devour, not any real allegiance. When Harry drove them off with his Patronus, it was an act of hope defeating despair, a literal metaphor for the failure of Voldemort's philosophy. Fear works only as long as it is the strongest emotion in the room. Once people choose hope instead, fear loses its power instantly. This contrast is why Dumbledore could smile even in the face of death. He understood something Voldemort never would, that trust is stronger than fear, that people who choose to fight for you will fight harder than those forced to. Voldemort's entire plan fell apart the moment Harry offered himself up, not as a victim, but as a willing sacrifice. The moment Voldemort killed Harry in the forest, he guaranteed that Harry's allies would never surrender. He proved Dumbledore's point better than Dumbledore himself ever could, that love and choice were more powerful than any curse, any unforgivable, any army of the terrified. Number 23. Poor intelligence and reconnaissance. Voldemort's greatest weakness was not his lack of magical power, but his disdain for understanding the subtleties of information, a failing that proved catastrophic in his war against Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix. He built his empire on terror, assuming that fear itself would yield loyalty and information, but failed to comprehend that true mastery required careful observation, analysis, and understanding of his enemy's motivations. It was this failure that allowed Albus Dumbledore to plan for years under his nose, nurturing Harry Potter as the eventual weapon against him. When Dumbledore died, Voldemort believed he had won a decisive victory, yet he was oblivious to the fact that Dumbledore's death was a carefully timed sacrifice, buying Harry and his allies precious knowledge of the Horcruxes. Voldemort's hubris was such that he never even considered that his most hated opponent would anticipate his every move and plan for a world in which he himself would not be there to guide his followers. Throughout his reign of terror, Voldemort trusted only brute force and intimidation, disregarding the value of true espionage. His so-called intelligence network consisted mainly of terrified informants, coerced turncoats, and ambitious but reckless followers like Bellatrix Lestrange, who thrived on violence over strategy. This led to a dangerous echo chamber where only what Voldemort wished to hear was reported to him, while inconvenient truths were suppressed out of fear. As Dumbledore said to Harry in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love," a concept Voldemort dismissed outright, failing to understand it as a source of strength and loyalty that he could never replicate among his Death Eaters. His blindness to emotional bonds and subtleties of human nature made him an incompetent spy master. His fatal flaw was most evident in his handling of Severus Snape, whom he believed to be his most loyal servant. In truth, Snape played a dangerous double game for years, feeding Voldemort carefully selected truths while withholding critical secrets. Voldemort considered himself a master legilimens, confident he could read Snape's mind, but he never realized that Snape's mastery of occlumency was such that even he was fooled. He failed to ask the right questions or test Snape's motives beyond the surface level. The result was catastrophic. Snape kept Dumbledore's deepest secrets, including the truth about Harry being the final Horcrux, concealed until the last moment. Voldemort never even guessed that the man standing beside him in so many crucial moments was in fact the one who would ensure his defeat. Voldemort's mishandling of Horcrux intelligence was equally ruinous. He believed that creating multiple Horcruxes would grant him invulnerability, but he never considered that the very act of making them would leave traces of dark magic that someone as brilliant as Dumbledore could detect. When Dumbledore discovered the ring, he did not simply destroy it, but carefully deduced that Voldemort would have created others. Voldemort's assumption that the concept of Horcruxes was so obscure that no one would ever guess his secret was a spectacular miscalculation. He underestimated the power of knowledge itself, its tendency to leak, to persist in unexpected places. As Dumbledore told Harry, "You are the true master of death, because the true master does not seek to run away from death. He accepts that he must die." Voldemort's refusal to accept mortality blinded him to the possibility that others might study him as carefully as he refused to study them. His entire plan rested on the fear he inspired, but fear made for unreliable intelligence. His Death Eaters were afraid to admit mistakes or bring him bad news. When the locket Horcrux was stolen from the cave, Voldemort did not even realize it until it was far too late. His overconfidence meant he never ordered a thorough check of his hiding places, nor did he have any system to verify the security of his own soul fragments. He assumed that no one would dare challenge him or even suspect the possibility. That error gave Harry, Ron, and Hermione the precious time they needed to hunt the Horcruxes without constant pursuit. Voldemort's failure to invest in reconnaissance was his undoing. Consider how he underestimated the Order of the Phoenix itself. He viewed them as scattered, weak, and demoralized after Dumbledore's death, never realizing that their strength lay in solidarity and trust. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Remus Lupin, and Arthur Weasley worked tirelessly to share information and protect one another, all while Voldemort's own inner circle fell into infighting and paranoia. Unlike Voldemort, Dumbledore had spent years fostering alliances and mentoring successors, leaving behind a legacy of coordinated resistance. Voldemort never even noticed the network of support that would keep Harry safe and informed, assuming instead that killing Dumbledore was equivalent to decapitating the Order. When Voldemort took over the Ministry of Magic, he imagined he had total control over Wizarding Britain, but he was too arrogant to notice the many cracks in his dominion. Resistance publications like The Quibbler and covert broadcasters like Potterwatch spread vital updates, countering his propaganda. Voldemort's forces made no effort to infiltrate these movements with competent spies, dismissing them as childish or irrelevant. Meanwhile, Harry and his friends stayed informed, adapting their plans and staying ahead of Death Eater patrols. Voldemort never anticipated that information would remain free in a world ruled by fear, failing to recognize the human tendency to share truth, even at risk of death. Perhaps most telling of all was Voldemort's decision to rely on intimidation rather than analysis when it came to Harry himself. He was so convinced that Harry's survival was merely luck or protection by others that he never seriously considered what might connect them so deeply. Even when he discovered the prophecy, he misread it, assuming it was purely about power rather than sacrifice. He ignored the critical line, for neither can live while the other survives, thinking it meant only that he must kill Harry first. He never dreamed that his own soul fragment lived in Harry, that killing Harry in the wrong way would doom himself. This misinterpretation of intelligence sealed his fate. Voldemort's strategic blindness extended even to his supposed allies. He trusted Lucius Malfoy with critical tasks despite repeated failures. He alienated Narcissa Malfoy, who ultimately lied to him about Harry's death at Hogwarts. He dismissed the loyalty of creatures like the House Elves, failing to consider their role in defending Hogwarts, or the Centaurs, who would join the battle at a crucial moment. He did not even attempt to recruit them, considering them beneath his notice. His refusal to recognize the potential intelligence value of those outside his aristocratic pureblood circle deprived him of allies who might have given him essential knowledge about the castle and its defenders. Another emblem of Voldemort's failure as an intelligence leader was his treatment of Gringotts. He used it as a hiding place for the Hufflepuff Cup horcrux, but never developed meaningful contacts or spies among the goblins themselves. His sole strategy for Gringotts was to terrify them into submission, ignoring that goblins are famously resentful of wizarding arrogance. This allowed Harry, Ron, and Hermione to gain help from Griphook, who betrayed them but nevertheless delivered them into the very heart of the vault. Voldemort only realized the vulnerability of Gringotts when it was far too late, launching into a furious panic that exposed his own fear to his followers. Even his reaction to Dumbledore's death demonstrated his intelligence failings. Rather than pausing to consider what Dumbledore's sacrifice might mean, Voldemort celebrated it as the final blow to his enemies. He never imagined Dumbledore would leave a plan in motion that Snape would help complete. The Elder Wand's allegiance was another humiliating example of Voldemort's inability to interpret subtle truths. He believed that killing Snape would win him mastery over it, unaware that disarming Draco Malfoy had already passed its loyalty to Harry. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows it is written, "The wand chooses the wizard." That much has always been clear to those of us who have studied wand lore. But Voldemort had never cared to study. He also never learned from his own past. When he first fell in 1981, it was because he underestimated the power of Lily Potter's sacrifice. Yet he returned with the same arrogant certainty, convinced he could kill Harry by sheer force. He made no effort to investigate the old magic that protected Harry, relying instead on Nagini as a tool of assassination in Godric's Hollow, a plan that failed spectacularly. He repeated this pattern over and over, convinced that raw power and terror could substitute for real strategy or research. Even when Voldemort gained control of Hogwarts, he failed to turn it into a true stronghold. Instead of embedding spies or analyzing student loyalties, he simply installed the Carrows to teach cruelty and obedience. But children are not so easily cowed. Dumbledore's army reformed in the shadows. Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood kept alive the spirit of rebellion, sharing information and coordinating efforts. Voldemort never ordered a proper counterinsurgency strategy, assuming that breaking bones and threatening families was enough. Ultimately, Voldemort's greatest error was believing that knowledge itself was weak if not backed by violence. He dismissed Dumbledore as an old fool obsessed with trivia and moral lectures, failing to see that Dumbledore's true weapon was his understanding of people. Voldemort's refusal to value intelligence work was not just an oversight, it was the defining flaw that ensured his defeat. While he mastered fear, he was mastered in turn by those who studied him, from him, and used his own secrets to destroy him. Voldemort could kill without mercy and torture without hesitation, but he never learned to listen. And in war, that is the deadliest mistake of all. Number 24. Believing death is absolute defeat. Voldemort's most tragic miscalculation did not lie only in his relentless pursuit of immortality, but in his failure to understand that death itself could be wielded as a final weapon against him. He spent years splintering his soul into horcruxes, believing he was outsmarting all who would defy him, and yet, in his blindness, he revealed a profound narrowness of spirit. He had come to believe that death was the ultimate loss, an irreversible erasure that no courage, no love, and no sacrifice could redeem. But in his arrogance, he overlooked how Dumbledore's lessons, the ones he dismissed as sentimental nonsense, had taken root in Harry Potter's heart. Voldemort's entire philosophy hinged on the conviction that preserving life at any cost was the supreme ambition. He was incapable of conceiving that someone might accept death, even walk toward it willingly to save others. The night in the Forbidden Forest, when Harry pressed the resurrection stone into his palm and felt the shade of his mother's hand on his shoulder, was the moment Voldemort's failure became irredeemable. For Voldemort, it was inconceivable that Harry would walk unarmed into his enemy's circle. He could not comprehend that by giving himself up, Harry would shield everyone he loved. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the text reads that Harry understood there was no need to be afraid. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Voldemort never accepted this idea. He believed death to be an unanswerable defeat, an abyss where power vanished. His philosophy left no space for the possibility that death could be a passage, a completion, or even a triumph. It was this rigid belief that drove Voldemort to split his soul 7 times, leaving each fragment in objects he thought untouchable. The diary, the cup, the diadem, all these horcruxes were monuments to his terror of oblivion. When Tom Riddle was a boy in the orphanage, he had already learned to scorn the idea that love could outlast life, mocking the other children and sneering at the idea of family bonds. By the time he emerged as Lord Voldemort, that scorn had hardened into the conviction that any sentiment tied to death was weakness. He failed to notice how every story he called foolishness, Lily Potter's sacrifice, Dumbledore's faith in redemption, Severus Snape's hidden loyalty, turned on acts of loss that became acts of victory. To Voldemort, death closed every door. He never imagined it could open any. In the Battle of Hogwarts, as the defenders assembled under the banners of Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, Voldemort was convinced that the threat of death would scatter them, but he could not read the defiance in their faces or grasp that their loyalty came from something beyond fear. Even when Neville Longbottom stepped forward to draw the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat, Voldemort's voice rose in disbelief because he still believed that the terror of death was the strongest motivator. He thought he was showing them mercy by offering them the chance to kneel and live. Yet his inability to see that some fates are worse than death became the chasm into which he fell. He saw Harry only as a boy who would be too weak to embrace mortality. This was the fatal error. Harry was strong precisely because he had learned that death was not the enemy Voldemort believed it to be. When Harry walked to his doom, he did not expect to return. He had come to understand that Lily's sacrifice lived on in his own capacity to love without condition. In the Deathly Hallows, he felt a surge of peace when he knew he was about to die. The narration describes he was not afraid, not really. Voldemort had spent his life convinced that this acceptance was cowardice. In truth, it was the courage he could never grasp. Perhaps the most pitiful aspect of Voldemort's error was that he believed himself the supreme realist. He scoffed at fairy tales and moral stories. He thought he was the only one brave enough to face what he saw as the truth, that death was annihilation. But, in refusing to consider any other possibility, he trapped himself in a childish certainty. He failed to learn what Dumbledore tried to teach, that love leaves traces more enduring than any horcrux. Voldemort believed love was a trivial sentiment compared to the permanence of magical defenses. Yet the sacrificial protection that Lily Potter cast with her last breath proved more enduring than any enchantment he devised. In his last hour, Voldemort stood in the Great Hall, his wand raised, still clinging to the conviction that Harry's death would cement his rule forever. The irony was almost too sharp to bear. By then, Harry's sacrifice had already woven a shield over every defender. Voldemort was alone with his horcruxes destroyed, and the Elder Wand no longer answering to him. The narrative records that Voldemort's curse struck Harry, who did not fall but rose again, living proof that the Dark Lord's beliefs had been wrong all along. Even in that moment, Voldemort could not understand how he had been outmaneuvered by an act of self-offering. He saw only that his power was slipping away, never grasping that it was his own blindness that doomed him. Voldemort's obsession with invulnerability became his undoing, because he never accepted that death could hold meaning. He was unprepared for any defiance rooted in self-sacrifice. When he mocked Dumbledore for placing trust in Harry, he exposed his own shallowness. He thought Dumbledore a sentimental fool. In reality, Dumbledore had long ago learned what Voldemort could not, that death is a part of life's wholeness, not its negation. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore told Harry, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." Voldemort never allowed himself to question that fear. Every choice Voldemort made sprang from the assumption that death was defeat. He could not believe in any narrative that did not revolve around survival at any cost. So when Harry entered the forest without a wand raised, Voldemort saw it as proof that Harry was finally broken. But Harry's surrender was an affirmation of his unbreakable spirit. The Dark Lord never understood that by accepting death, Harry had already claimed a deeper victory. His willingness to be the last line of defense for everyone he loved transformed him into a force Voldemort could not subdue. This error also poisoned Voldemort's relationships with his followers. He ruled by fear of death, never inspiring loyalty born of love or admiration. Bellatrix Lestrange, fanatic though she was, followed him out of obsession, not respect. The Death Eaters remained faithful only so long as they feared what he would do if they left. Contrast this with the way people rallied to Harry's side, even when defeat seemed inevitable. When Minerva McGonagall ordered the evacuation of Hogwarts, many stayed behind to fight, not because they were unafraid of dying, but because they valued something greater than survival. Voldemort could not inspire this kind of allegiance because he dismissed the very ideals that make sacrifice possible. He never realized that in stripping his soul again and again, he was hollowing himself out of the very humanity that could have saved him. His fear made him brittle. His inability to imagine any purpose beyond his own survival led to decisions that were strategically unsound. By scattering his soul into so many fragments, he became dependent on the objects that anchored his existence. Each horcrux was a monument to his delusion, a testament to his conviction that life was the only currency of power. In the end, those horcruxes became vulnerabilities he could not defend. This is why Voldemort could never comprehend how Sirius Black would volunteer to face death at the Department of Mysteries to protect Harry. He could not fathom why Molly Weasley would charge at Bellatrix Lestrange, screaming in rage, risking her life for her daughter. Every time someone fought back out of love, Voldemort saw only foolishness. He believed they were too weak to grasp the truth he clung to. Yet every moment of sacrifice carved another crack in his illusions. He had made himself incapable of empathy, and so he mistook bravery for stupidity. His defeat was not merely the result of tactical errors or bad luck. It was the inevitable consequence of his refusal to see that death could be met with integrity. When he finally faced Harry in the Great Hall, the boy who had walked willingly to die, Voldemort's horror was not simply that his magic had failed. It was that everything he believed about death and power had collapsed in front of him. He tried to brandish fear as a weapon, but it shattered against the reality that some souls cannot be conquered, even by death itself. Number 25. Ignoring the role of ordinary people in war. Voldemort's greatest weakness was never just his cruelty or his obsession with blood purity. It was his arrogant blindness to the truth that lay right before him, written in every line of wizarding history and every corner of the world he sought to rule. He saw the Muggle world as irrelevant and dismissed Muggle-borns as impostors in wizarding culture, mudbloods unworthy of power or respect. In doing so, he carved out for himself an empire of fear that was riddled with fatal cracks. He could terrify most of wizarding Britain, silence dissent in the ministry, and strike terror into pure blood families who cowered behind ancestral gates. But he failed to account for the messy, irrepressible courage of ordinary people who had no magic at all, and for the stubborn, irreducible humanity of those he tried to erase. When Voldemort rose to power, he believed that controlling the Ministry of Magic and eliminating dissent among wizards would secure his dominion. His Death Eaters installed Pius Thicknesser as puppet minister, spread propaganda through the Daily Prophet, and kidnapped Muggle-borns for interrogation and imprisonment. But he barely devoted a thought to the Muggle world, beyond issuing orders for the punishment of Muggles who might see Dementors or witness magic. The Death Eaters spread fear among wizarding families with torture and the Cruciatus Curse, but they lacked even the most basic plan for dealing with the Muggle government, which continued, unmolested, to govern millions. Voldemort's worldview couldn't even conceive of Muggles as meaningful players on the board. As Hermione Granger said in Deathly Hallows, he doesn't want them educated, he doesn't want them to think for themselves, he wants them weak and frightened and easy to rule. But in his obsession with wizards alone, he left a massive flank unguarded. Muggle-born witches and wizards themselves were Voldemort's first overlooked asset. By demonizing them and threatening them with death or imprisonment, he forced them underground and into resistance. Ted Tonks, for example, was hunted for being Muggle-born, and while on the run he spread news about the Snatchers, warned others of Ministry patrols, and helped keep alive the flow of information that Voldemort wanted to stifle. His death at the hands of the Snatchers only further inflamed resistance among the people he had once helped. Voldemort could not imagine that threatening entire families and labeling them undesirable would have consequences that strengthened solidarity among the hunted. In rejecting Muggle-borns as unworthy, he created a network of people with nothing to lose, driven by sheer defiance. Voldemort's supporters sneered at Muggles as unimportant and unworthy of attention, but this contempt blinded them to the crucial role Muggles could play as helpers, allies, and protectors. In Order of the Phoenix, the Dursleys, despite their cruelty, are forcibly enlisted to protect Harry from Voldemort under Dumbledore's orders. This arrangement underscores the real, legal protections afforded to Harry by Lily's sacrifice and the bond of blood with Petunia. Voldemort never understood or cared to understand the depth of that magic or the Muggle family ties that sustained it. In scorning Muggle bonds as worthless, he missed how even a family that hated magic would be compelled to shelter the boy he sought to kill, out of blood obligation. Voldemort's failure to consider Muggle resistance meant he also ignored the simple logistics of occupying a society. While Death Eaters terrorized wizarding Britain, the Muggle world continued with only partial awareness of the danger. But Muggles were not all oblivious. Some noticed strange weather patterns when Dementors bred unchecked, and rumours spread about disappearances and attacks. The Ministry under Voldemort was so busy purging Muggle-borns that it lost the capacity to maintain secrecy, creating ever greater risks of exposure. It never occurred to Voldemort that an entire society of millions, once aware, might resist, even if their weapons were words, hiding places, and rumours. The Fidelius charm was one of the wizarding world's most powerful defences, and many used it to hide from Death Eaters, but even without magic, ordinary Muggles provided refuge. In Deathly Hallows, Dean Thomas spends months on the run after refusing to register his blood status. He survives partly because sympathetic people help him, people with no reason to trust the Ministry's new order. These unrecorded helpers were Voldemort's blind spot. He could see only power as force, wands, curses, control. He did not see that the moral authority of common decency would lead people to break the law to save those in danger. Voldemort also underestimated the power of Muggle-born knowledge. Hermione Granger, daughter of dentists, had a Muggle's appreciation for technology research and improvisation that purebloods often scorned. She alone thought to carry with her a beaded bag packed with supplies that sustained their months in hiding. She also modified her parents' memories to keep them safe in Australia, using magic in ways Voldemort's followers never anticipated. As she told Harry, "I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really called Wendell and Monica Wilkins, and that their life's ambition is to move to Australia." This measure saved their lives. Voldemort never realized that someone with dirty blood could be his intellectual equal or his superior in resourcefulness. His obsession with blood status led to a policy of humiliating Muggle-borns with interrogations to prove they'd stolen their magic. These trials, presided over by Umbridge, were designed to break their spirit, but in truth they made the regime look monstrous, even to wizards who might have stayed neutral. Some members of the Wizengamot walked out. Families with Muggle-born relatives smuggled them away. Voldemort created martyrs, symbols of his cruelty that made people question their loyalty. He could not imagine that fear would backfire because he assumed everyone shared his values, that power alone was to be respected. In ignoring Muggles, Voldemort also ignored the entire infrastructure that supported wizarding secrecy. The Ministry had long depended on obliviators to cover up magical accidents, on Muggle liaisons to smooth over strange events, on cooperation to ensure coexistence. But the Death Eater regime simply abandoned these efforts. Dementors roamed freely, breeding and spreading despair that affected Muggle communities as well. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry describes how the weather grows cold and miserable around Little Whinging because of Dementors, though Voldemort himself saw them only as useful weapons. He never asked how a society suffering inexplicable disasters might respond, or how such chaos might eventually make secrecy impossible. The contempt Voldemort showed for Muggles also infected his followers. Death Eaters were selected for their cruelty, not their planning skills. Even Lucius Malfoy, once a cunning manipulator, was reduced to a snivelling wreck when Voldemort seized power, unable to protect his own son. The Death Eater's reign was sloppy, marked by infighting, paranoia, and betrayal. Bellatrix Lestrange, for all her loyalty, was too unstable to hold power, and the Carrows were incompetent bullies whose regime at Hogwarts inspired revolt rather than compliance. By scorning non-magical people and fixating on blood purity, Voldemort recruited yes-men rather than capable governors. One of the clearest signs of Voldemort's blind spot is his utter dismissal of the love that connected wizards and Muggles. He saw love as weakness, but love was precisely what protected Harry, not only from his first killing curse, but through years of sacrifice. In Deathly Hallows, Harry walks to his own death in the Forbidden Forest, knowing that his willingness to die for others will protect them. Voldemort cannot comprehend this. He cannot see that a mother's love, Lily's sacrifice, or a friend's loyalty, Hermione's and Ron's unwavering support, are not abstractions, but forms of resistance he cannot break. Perhaps the most damning evidence of Voldemort's short-sightedness lies in his failure to anticipate the loyalty of people who weren't even wizards. Kreacher, the Black family's house elf, switches allegiance from contempt for mudbloods to fierce loyalty to Harry because Harry treats him with respect. Voldemort, who tortured and murdered the house elf Hokey without hesitation, never saw house elves as anything but disposable tools. He failed to understand that even those he enslaved could turn against him if shown dignity by his enemies. Kreacher's efforts in Deathly Hallows to track Mundungus Fletcher and rally other elves were not the actions of a powerless servant, but of an ally motivated by loyalty that Voldemort could never command. In refusing to account for Muggles and Muggleborns, Voldemort also misread the entire strategy of Dumbledore's army. These were not professional aurors or experienced fighters. They were teenagers, many with Muggle backgrounds, who trained in secret, spreading knowledge, inventing signals, and building solidarity. Neville Longbottom, whose parents were tortured into insanity, was not from a Muggle family but learned from Harry how to lead. Seamus Finnegan, with a Muggle parent, was radicalized by the horrors at Hogwarts. Voldemort's forces cracked down brutally, but with every cruelty they created more leaders, more reasons to fight. The Room of Requirement itself became a hidden fortress that no Death Eater could find. Ultimately, Voldemort's plan failed not just because of Harry's courage or Dumbledore's wisdom, but because he fundamentally did not understand the society he tried to rule. He saw Wizarding Britain as a chessboard where only blood purity, magical strength, and fear mattered. But war is fought by people, not pawns, and people, Muggle or wizard, elf or giant, have motives, loyalties, and strengths that cannot be reduced to bloodlines. In scorning the Muggle world, Voldemort failed to see that the line between wizard and Muggle was more porous than he dreamed. He lost a war because he did not know how to win hearts, only how to destroy them. Number 26. Inability to forgive or offer second chances. Lord Voldemort's greatest mistake was neither a tactical blunder in battle nor a careless slip of the tongue. It was something far simpler, yet far more corrosive to his cause, his inability to forgive even the smallest failing. This flaw, wrapped in the trappings of absolute power, poisoned every relationship he ever had with his followers. He preferred to rule through terror rather than loyalty, to demand perfection rather than permit any human error. When Bellatrix Lestrange knelt before him, her voice trembling with devotion, she could never be certain whether her devotion would protect her from his wrath. Even the most fervent allegiance meant nothing if she faltered in a single task. It was this merciless code of conduct that drove his Death Eaters to lie, to conceal, to scurry about in fear of his disapproval. Voldemort's iron grip looked unbreakable from the outside, but inside it was brittle as old bone. The example of Lucius Malfoy shines as a case study in how Voldemort's refusal to grant second chances hollowed out the very foundations of his support. Lucius once held considerable influence, his fortune and family name lending prestige to Voldemort's cause. But after the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries, when the prophecy was lost, Lucius became an object of Voldemort's scorn. As described in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Voldemort punished Lucius as a warning to the others, humiliating him by stripping away power and making no secret of his contempt. This was not a leader who inspired confidence. It was a tyrant who inspired only desperation. Lucius's failure was not forgiven, and his usefulness was cast aside as though it had never existed. The lesson was clear to every Death Eater watching. No mistake, however understandable, would ever be overlooked. The result of this iron-fisted intolerance was a creeping culture of paranoia. Those who feared punishment above all else lost the capacity to admit mistakes. Wormtail, who had once been so eager to serve, became a cringing wreck whose only talent was sycophancy. He did not dare to deliver honest information. He did not dare to warn Voldemort if something went amiss. In the end, Wormtail's terrified compliance was worth less than the truth he could have spoken. As Dumbledore once explained, "You are blinded by the love of the office you hold." Voldemort was blinded by the love of control, and it made him deaf to any voice that did not flatter his vanity. Even the more competent Death Eaters, like Severus Snape, were forced to maintain elaborate deceptions to survive. Snape played a dangerous double game, walking the line between his genuine allegiance to Dumbledore and the necessity of satisfying Voldemort's expectations. He knew better than to confess any hesitation or to admit that he was not fully committed to the Dark Lord's cause. His very survival depended on secrecy. If Voldemort had been capable of tolerating the smallest dissent, Snape might have been compelled to give more genuine counsel. Instead, Snape's intelligence became yet. Another hidden asset Voldemort could never fully harness. The culture of fear did not merely silence confession, it stifled initiative. When every mistake is punished without mercy, no follower dares to take risks. This paralysis is evident in the way the Death Eaters managed Hogwarts after Voldemort took power. While they held the school, they inflicted cruelty for its own sake, rather than striving to strengthen their position. Alecto and Amicus Carrow punished students with the Cruciatus curse, but they lacked any vision beyond immediate intimidation. They had learned from Voldemort himself that ruling by fear was more important than ruling by strategy. The atmosphere he created did not cultivate clever allies, it cultivated petty tyrants and incompetent bullies. Another example stands out in the story of Regulus Black. Though not widely known to Voldemort, Regulus embodied the ultimate consequence of such a regime. He joined the Death Eaters as an impressionable young man proud to serve the Dark Lord. But when he discovered that Voldemort had planned to use Kreacher, his family's elf, as disposable bait to protect a horcrux, Regulus saw the truth of Voldemort's inhumanity. He realized there was no redemption or understanding in Voldemort's vision. To err, even as an elf, was to deserve death. Regulus's disillusionment led him to betray Voldemort, sacrificing his own life to steal the locket Horcrux. This betrayal was born not of ambition or cowardice, but of revulsion. Voldemort's inability to comprehend loyalty that was earned rather than extracted made him blind to the danger under his nose. Throughout these years, Voldemort surrounded himself with men and women too afraid to contradict him. His orders were followed to the letter, but the spirit of those orders was often neglected. When he commanded Draco Malfoy to kill Dumbledore, it was as much a punishment for Lucius's disgrace as it was a tactical decision. Draco, terrified and unready, bumbled through the mission in a haze of desperation. The boy's fear was so absolute that he could neither refuse nor succeed. If Voldemort had given Draco any grace, any sense that he would not be murdered for failure, Draco might have confessed his fear to someone who could help him. Instead, Voldemort's plan relied on coercion alone, and it was Severus Snape who completed the deed out of necessity. It is telling that Voldemort never suspected Snape's hidden motive. He assumed that fear alone was sufficient to guarantee loyalty. This blindness to the nuances of human motivation was a deeper failing than any miscalculation on the battlefield. Voldemort could never accept that mercy has a purpose beyond sentimentality. He could not imagine that forgiveness might secure a loyalty more reliable than fear. Even in the case of Peter Pettigrew, who owed Voldemort everything for restoring him to life, Voldemort made certain that Wormtail's loyalty was rooted in terror rather than gratitude. When Wormtail hesitated to kill Harry in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, the hesitation was born of a thin thread. Of decency Voldemort had never fully extinguished. That moment of weakness cost Wormtail his life, as the silver hand Voldemort had gifted him turned upon its master. The irony was perfect. The instrument of his supposed reward became the instrument of his punishment. Voldemort's worldview made betrayal inevitable. No one could be trusted because no one was permitted to fail. When an organization has no room for mistakes, It becomes an organization that can only pretend to function. Voldemort may have believed that a chain of terror would bind his followers tighter than any bond of friendship or respect. Yet in the end, those same followers fled, abandoned him, or secretly worked against him. As Harry himself observed, "You're the one who is weak. You will never know love or friendship." This was not merely a moral failing, it was a strategic catastrophe. The final battle at Hogwarts proved the consequences of this philosophy beyond all doubt. As the tide turned against Voldemort's forces, the Death Eaters began to scatter. Narcissa Malfoy lied to Voldemort's face, claiming Harry was dead, when in truth she was acting only to protect her son. Bellatrix, once the most devoted of all his followers, fought with desperation rather than conviction. The Carrows disappeared into the chaos, unwilling to die for a cause they had never truly believed in. Voldemort's power crumbled because he had never given his followers a reason to remain at his side when the end was near. Even the moment of Voldemort's own death was surrounded by the echo of his refusal to understand redemption. When he demanded that Harry Potter surrender himself, he did so in the belief that no one would sacrifice themselves for others unless compelled by fear. But Harry had been shown again and again that forgiveness, love, and second chances were stronger than any curse. His willingness to walk into the forest, to face death without hatred, was the ultimate refutation of everything Voldemort believed. As Harry later explained, he didn't love, or care, or understand. And that failure of understanding left Voldemort alone in the end, defeated not by a stronger wand but by a stronger heart. This legacy of terror is more than a cautionary tale. It is a testament to how a leader's inability to forgive can sabotage every triumph. Voldemort's reign was never stable because it was built on the shifting sands of fear. No one who served him felt safe enough to be honest. No one who feared him could ever trust him. Even the most ardent followers kept secrets, hedged bets, or looked for escape routes. Voldemort may have imagined himself a master of destiny, but he was no more than a tyrant whose ignorance of forgiveness doomed him from the start.